there is something about that tangle of strangers, pressed together for days with nothing in common but the need to go from one place to another and never see each other again.
Hello, and welcome to Film Rant. Well, we've already had snakes on a plane, and now it's time for Cluedo on a Train, starring and directed by Kenneth Branagh, or Gilderoy Lockhart for some of you Harry Potter fans out there. Surprisingly, I've never seen any previous iterations of this story or read the book, so I was going into this movie completely blind. I often think that detective whodunit plots are better suited for TV rather than cinema, but there are a few exceptions. Is this one of them? Well, to answer that, I'll be spoiling the movie, and now I normally just brush this off and move on, but this movie hinges on you not knowing who the murderer is. If you know, all sorts of tension and mystery in the movie completely dissipates. So, if you normally watch my reviews and don't care about spoilers, that's great, but for this movie at least, please see the movie before watching this review, or you'll seriously ruin the film for yourself. Hercule Poirot was played by director Kenneth Branagh, and he was a perfectly enjoyable character, part Benedict Cumberbatch Sherlock and part Gustav H from Grand Budapest Hotel. Poirot is the only character in the entire movie you can really attach yourself to. We get to know his personal demons and what makes him tick relatively quickly, and he's the only person you can really say you know anything about. His detective skills are a little too overpowered bullshit at times, but that's more of a script issue, so I'll save that for later. I normally talk about most of the main characters in a movie before I get into the main part of the review, but in this movie every character except Poirot seems to be there purely just to be a suspect in the murder case. We don't get to know much about anybody at all, just a possible motive for the murder of Johnny Depp, who we also don't know a great deal about until we're told an expositional story by Poirot. The characters also have drastically different amounts of screen time. Judi Dench, Penelope Cruz and the car dealer guy were especially underused. I just couldn't help but think that these characters were literally only there to be suspects and weren't real characters or even real people. They were just living embodiments of Cluedo cards. But, you know, it was nice to see all these actors be suspects in a fictional murder case before they're all suspected of being fucking sex pests. The movie begins in an almost James Bond-esque fashion with Poirot finishing up a case he's been working on. This opening 10 minutes already tells us a lot about Poirot's character. He's wanting to go on holiday, kind of this movie's equivalent to the cop being 3 days away from retirement. He's got some pretty strong OCD tendencies, which also plays into why his detective skills are so good, and he can solve crimes with the smallest clue. He can also partially predict the future, which we see when he shoves his cane into a wall to catch someone who will be running past it in a minute or two. It is also where he says, "I believe there is only right and wrong, with nothing in the middle," which kind of made me think, not sure about that, but that will come into play with an issue I have later. But yeah, the opening few minutes are really well executed and it sets up Poirot's character perfectly. This movie kind of plays on people's general perceptions of Hollywood movies, in that they're full of plot conveniences and bad writing. This was certainly the case for me. I guess my faith in Hollywood has dwindled over the years because I thought the fact that every character is connected to this Armstrong case was a massive plot convenience so the movie could make everybody a suspect. But then it turns out that it's that in itself that's the major clue all along. They're all connected to the case because they're all working together and they all plan to be there. I feel like an absolute mug for not realising that this is the big clue. But as I say, I just thought it was poor writing. Turns out it was actually genius writing, and it relies on the audience thinking these characters are there by coincidence in order for the reveal at the end to work. Maybe you worked it out when you watched the movie, but I sure as hell didn't, and I feel like an idiot for not thinking of it. However, while I did like this element of the writing, I also think it's better when you have a murder mystery with total strangers, but all of whom have a motive to commit the crime. The fact that all of the characters in the movie are the murderer kind of felt like an easy way out and allowed the movie to be written in a less interesting or clever way than it perhaps could have been. But I do feel like I'm being very nitpicky with that problem. It's like saying Star Wars is a bad movie because it could be done better, which is clearly not true. It's still a great movie regardless. For me, the end of the movie is both the strongest and weakest point. As I just mentioned, I love the conclusion of the murder mystery. The reveal that the entire cast worked as a unit to murder Johnny Depp was great and it totally made sense. What didn't make sense for me was when Poirot decided that he wouldn't arrest any of them. Correct me if I'm wrong, but he does this because he thought that there was right and wrong, but then realised that there's this group of people who got revenge on a despicable man who put a massive dent in their lives by kidnapping and murdering a child. Okay, I completely understand that, and that's kind of what I was thinking at the beginning of the movie when he said the thing about there being only right and wrong. There's plenty of morally grey situations people can get themselves into throughout their life. I mean, look at characters like The Punisher, Netflix Daredevil, or even Rick Grimes. Ultimately, they want to help people or protect the ones they love, but they will go to very extreme lengths themselves, often becoming the very thing that they want to destroy. This is exactly the motive the group have in the movie for killing Johnny Depp. For some reason, this motive persuades Poirot to let them all go because he doesn't see them as bad people, just people who wanted revenge on a man who ruined a part of their life. Now, I have two big problems with this. One, surely in his illustrious career, Poirot has came across some desperate soul who's killed somebody in the name of revenge. I'd wager a good chunk of murders are to satisfy some kind of revenge or vendetta. Two, he explicitly says earlier in the movie that you cannot kill murderers, otherwise you become the beast yourself. So at the end, when he lets them go, I say this is more of him going against his own beliefs rather than character development. The two can be confused very easily, but for me, this action just ruins his character a bit. Yeah, sure, these people killed a disgusting man out of some fully justified revenge, but at the end of the day, they murdered a man and there has to be repercussions for that. Otherwise, you just have anarchy. The law is in place specifically to stop this kind of shit happening. If you could just kill anybody who wronged you in a significant way, it'd be like the Wild West. Poirot, who is one of the best detectives in the world and a man who upholds the law with an iron fist, goes completely against his word because he can empathise with the murderers. Sorry, I just don't buy it. I can understand him letting the majority of the group go and arresting the ringleader only. That's kind of a compromise while still getting a prosecution, but he just lets them all walk free. This kind of tainted the movie for me, and it's a shame because it's a damn good movie. Surprisingly, there's not much in the movie that makes you aware that you're watching a movie. A lot of events that happen are kind of believable and the characters have realistic reactions to them and ask realistic questions. Say for one, there's a scene in the movie where Michelle Pfeiffer's character screams and Poirot rushes into her cabin to find her hunched over with a knife embedded in her shoulder. Now that's a big moment, right? The killer's just attempted to strike again. Who stabbed you, Michelle? What did they look like? Did they say anything to you? Was it a man or a woman? Why did they try and kill you? Did Poirot ask any of these questions? Did he fuck? He takes her into the kitchen cabin where the rest of the cast is sat waiting and she just says something like, "Oh, I didn't see him, so don't question me." And Poirot just believes that and lets it go. Surely the best detective in the world would at least ask her the questions I mentioned above. It also would make no sense that the murderer would just leave the weapon embedded in her shoulder, but again, Poirot doesn't seem to click onto that either. Aside from this rather ridiculous scene, the rest of the movie holds up pretty well and is relatively believable. A major letdown with the writing of this movie is that it's about as subtle as a dick to the eye socket. There's a lot of characters that all need to be implicated in the death of Johnny Depp, and it's immediately noticeable as some characters just give us backstory of their lives without any natural prompt. They also sometimes say things that make them fit a stereotypical depiction of a suspicious character. Daisy Ridley especially, with all of her no comment bullshit, and the not so subtle hint at the beginning of the movie where she's discussing some kind of mysterious plan with the Doctor. It leaves a sour taste because you get the impression that the movie doesn't want to take its time and reveal subtle aspects about characters with one line or even just one word of dialogue. Everyone is just so obviously suspect and often just straight up tells Poirot a reason or motive they would have for killing Johnny Depp. Murder mystery movies are so much better when the dialogue is much more subtle and there's only maybe 4 lines of dialogue in the entire movie that reveal who the murderer is. Instead, Murder on the Orient Express gives you about 46 lines of dialogue that makes everyone the murderer, which works in the end, but it just feels so forced and unnatural. I'd rather the group was smaller and the dialogue was much tighter and less revealing. However, there's also issues going the other way. Sometimes Poirot connects dots by plucking things out of thin air. It was an incredible stretch for him to decipher that Countess Eleanor was the sister of the woman who died in the Armstrong case, but the plot needed him to know that to continue. He doesn't really notice any specific clues, he just kinda spitballs and happens to be right. How did he know what Ratchet's real name was as well? I mean, did he read his passport and discover it that way or some other way? Maybe I missed that, but it just seems like all of a sudden he realises Ratchet isn't who he says he is and he's actually this Cassetti guy who kidnapped and murdered a child. I get that Poirot is the world's best detective and all, but sometimes he just pulls things directly from the script because he needs to know them. This guy could play Connect 4 blindfolded. I mean, maybe I just missed a lot of the clues and a rewatch would solve it, but on first viewing, Poirot seems a bit OP. From a technical standpoint, Murder on the Orient Express is absolutely gripping from start to finish. It is generally very well paced, but I just wish it spent a little more time in conversations. Characters often rush through conversations and blurt out things they wouldn't say naturally. Poirot connects dots a little too fast as well, and the initial setup of the side characters is very clunky. We first meet Johnny Depp as he's trying to get a table in a restaurant, and we get one small glance at Willem Dafoe. Michelle Pfeiffer accidentally bumps into Poirot on the train and never stops talking and gives us some really obvious expositional backstory. Judi Dench is picky about which cabin she stays in. The only characters who were set up properly are Poirot and Daisy Ridley. Everyone else is shoehorned in a bit and it made the beginning feel a bit bumpy. However, once everybody is on the train, the movie goes swimmingly. It never gets boring and it always has you questioning who the murderer is, and you're never 100% sure either, which is a good thing. If you could suss it early on, then the movie loses its entire pull in the first place. Which leads me on to say that, like other murder mysteries, I think this movie is a one viewing only movie. Maybe two so you can look out for clues once you know everything and work backwards. This movie definitely hinges on its mystery though, and on first viewing, it keeps that level of mystery up right until the very final reveal, so well done Mr. Branagh for that. So overall, Murder on the Orient Express is a perfectly entertaining and engaging murder mystery with a great lead. However, a lot of the side characters don't feel like actual characters and more just tools for the plot, while also blurting out random bursts of exposition needed to make the audience suspect them in the murder investigation. There's a big flaw in Poirot's character at the end in that he goes against his own beliefs with no real reason to do so, and there's only one big moment that has you questioning the reality of the movie. However, despite its flaws, this movie is absolutely worth seeing, and I hope to God you saw it before you watch this review, because I've just ruined the entire thing and I fully believe this movie wouldn't be half as good if you knew who done it in the end. I usually say go and see the movie at the end of my reviews if I liked it, but I'm guessing you've already seen it, so what did you think of it? Let me know in the comments below. Murder on the Orient Express gets 3.5 frames out of 5. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on Film Rant.
Who takes up the knife?
Cannot trust a one. Another one?